Good evening, and welcome to prayer meeting tonight. Joining me tonight is going to be Aaron, our pastoral intern, and also Pastor Brady. And we're going to continue in our study from side by side. So if you have this book, we encourage you to continue to read along with us as we go through it. But just, we've been talking through this book side by side and reminding us of our responsibility as Christians to come alongside one another, to spend time getting to know one another, to spend time getting to just do all the one another's that God has called us to do, bearing each other's burdens, being there for each other, being an encouragement to one another so we can support each other as God has called us to do as a family, as a church. And our first half of the book was all about us being needy. We are very needy people. We need help. We need support. It is too much for us. God has provided our greatest needs, and God encourages us to also lean on one another as well. So we are all needy people. But the second half of the book that we started last week is about how we are also, by God's grace, also needed. Each of us are needed and can be used by God. And so I want to encourage you tonight as we look at chapter 8. This is the theme for tonight, is move toward and greet one another. Because see, people are called to love one another and be there for each other, but the problem is, even though we all have burdens and needs, we're not very willing to share our problems with each other. We're not willing to ask for help. And so maybe you feel that way. It's hard to ask someone to help you. It's easier just to try to muscle through it yourself, or just to say it's not worth it and give up on whatever it is, whatever task you're trying to do. But God calls us to seek out those in need and to support them, to help them. And so if there's a whole bunch of people in our church that are needy, and we're all called to use our gifts to help each other, what do we need to do? Well, we need to be proactive, not reactive. A lot of times, I'm willing to say, I'll help anyone who comes to me and asks for it. If a neighbor comes over to my house and asks me for sugar, I'll give them sugar. If they come to my house and ask me to even help them with their, whatever it might be, yard work, something up and, helping fix the roof. If they come to me, then I'm willing to help. But the reality is, like I said, a lot of people don't ask. And so we need to be willing to proactively seek them out and be able to reach them where they are and help them with their needs, whatever it may be. And so step one is tonight, moving towards greeting them. Just going to people and helping them by greeting them, getting to know them, building that relationship so they can share their burdens, their struggles, and that we can together help them as they meet their needs and to work together as God has called us to do. And so an example of this is obviously God pursuing us. God did not wait for us to be ready to come to him. God actively pursued us. Look through the Old Testament. He's constantly pursuing the children of Israel. And he even gives an example in the book of Hosea about his pursuit of his people. You have Hosea and his wife, Gomer. Gomer was not a faithful woman. She was constantly being unfaithful, constantly disrespecting, leaving the marriage, doing all kinds of crazy things. But Gomer was representative of us, and Hosea was representative of God. And so God pursues us, and Hosea goes and pursues her, desiring to restore her, constantly reaching out to her, showing her grace and mercy, and wanting to bring her back into relationship with him. And that's exactly what God did with his people. In Hosea 11, verses 1 through 4, God said this, "When Israel was a child, I loved him, and out of Egypt I called my son. The more they were called, the more they went away. They kept sacrificing to the Baals and burning offerings to idols. Yet it was I who taught Ephraim to walk. I took them up in their arms, but they did not know that I healed them. I led them with cords of kindness, with bands of love, and I became to them as one who eases the yoke of their jaws, and I bent down to them and fed them." You see in there God's pursuit of his people, because he cares for them, he loves them. He's not willing to let them go off and do their own thing and just live in sin, live in their burden and struggle. God pursued them. That's what we see, obviously, in the New Testament. Jesus came down to us. We did not have to rise to him. God came to us, sacrificed himself for us, so that we could be restored to God. In John 3:16, for God so loved the world, he gave his only son, that whoever believes in him would not perish but have eternal life. I know Pastor Brady, and I'm sure other pastors have said, he's kind of like the good son, the correct older brother who would go to his younger brother and save him out of the pig filth that he was in and bring him home. That is what Jesus did. He pursues, and he pursued us. You have to understand God loves you and God pursues you. An example in Scripture of Jesus doing that was from John chapter 5, verse 5. He was going along, and he sees a man whom everyone else disregarded. He was a crippled man, a hurting man. And look what happens here in this dialogue. Verse 5 says, one man was there who had been an invalid for 38 years. When Jesus saw him lying there, he knew that he had already been there a long time. And he said to him, do you want to be healed? The sick man answered, sir, I have no one to put me into the pool when the water is stirred up, and while I am going, another steps in before me. And Jesus said to him, get up, take up your bed, and walk. And at once the man was healed, and he took up his bed and walked. Now, what I find interesting about this particular account of Jesus interacting with somebody, this is a person who everyone else ignored. Did you hear his pain? He wanted to go. He wants to be healed. But nobody was there to help him. No one was there to support him in his time of need and struggle. To the point you can kind of hear in his tone of voice that he is given up. I'm here, I'm waiting, but I can't make it. And Jesus steps into his life and helps him and is there for him. It's so important that we understand God is calling us not to wait for people to come to us, but like him, we need to love like him, we need to care for others like him, and we need to pursue them. We need to be proactive, moving towards them, and that means we've got to be intentional, and we've got to make it a priority. A lot of times, as the book says, you know what? Our tendency is to move towards our close friends. We have great conversations, great relationships. But what happens is when people from the outside look at us, they see little cliques. The same people hang out with the same people, and they're talking, they're having a good time, but no one's allowed in that group. They're outsiders. And I know being guilty of that myself sometimes is I do feel that way. Like, I'm very friendly, I'm very kind. But then the person says, yeah, but you're only friendly and kind to those you know. I was here for weeks, and no one ever said hi. No one ever greeted me. No one ever spent time with me. And that should not be so, church. I'm thankful that, for the most part, our church is very good at this. We're good at going to people, greeting them, spending time with them, seeing those who are guests, and going to them. And that is a great thing, and I'm proud of our church for doing that, but we still need to grow in this, to be intentional. Imagine our church, if we every week took our time out, not to just run to our friends and go say, hi, I've missed you, haven't seen you all week, but took time out to look for someone who we don't know, and then went and greeted them and had a meaningful conversation with them. I'm not saying going and seeing and talking to everybody in the church. I'm saying each week find one person that you don't know and get to know them. Because see, that's step one before you can ever bear their burdens. They got to know that you care and want to even talk to them and want to listen to them, and they can trust you. It will take sacrifice. And I know sometimes we say sacrifice. I can say hi to people. I can go through the halls and say good morning to every single person I see. Well, actually, in page 75, the author addresses this. He says, God's not looking for serial greeters who offer a brief and boisterous good morning and then move on to the next person. That is not what we're talking about when we say move toward others and greet them. I'm guilty of that. I'm sure we all are. We should still say good morning to people. But if that is the only conversation you're having with anybody all day long, that's not your close friends, that's a problem. That's not what God's called us to do. And so we need to be mindful that this is going to take time. It will take sacrifice, and we need to be willing to do that. It may take sacrifice of our energy, maybe of our possessions, our things, but also being vulnerable with that person. Being willing to hear them out and be able to share our story. It's hard for someone who's new to, in your relationship to share with you their struggles and their pains, unless maybe you first shared your struggles and pains. Then you can interact and share and feel vulnerable together. And they might reject you. And that's a possibility. And I know sometimes people say, I reached out to so many people and they just didn't want to talk. I said, how are you doing? And they said, I'm good. And they just walked away. But that doesn't mean stop trying. We're still called to actively pursue. Just remember back to God. Did he stop trying to pursue you and me? No. He pursues us. He loves us. And so he's actively pursuing us. We should be actively pursuing, not in an offensive way, pushing people, but we should be actively trying to reach out and love on them and care for them. Asking them how they're doing, opening the door for meaningful conversations. And so we need to be willing to do that with others. Let this act of love drive us to want to just minister to them, to care for them, to put them first. Like I said, this is not something that's easy. If we're honest and consistent, it's hard. We need God to help us. And that's the whole point. Doing this where we're going out and reaching out to others, greeting them, getting to know them, investing in their lives, it's going to take the power of God to be consistent, to be genuine, and that's a good thing. Allow that to lead you to lean on God more, to depend on him more. And maybe on a Sunday morning when you get up, pray to God. God, help me to see the person you want me to see, to minister to. Make that clear to me. Help my mind to be thinking about that when I enter the room and not just focused on me. Because I know sometimes when I come to worship, I am focused on God. I'm focused on the beautiful music, the great teaching. But I can't miss what God's called me to do, to focus on others, to love others as well, which means looking to them, looking for them. Because we all are needy, like I said at the very beginning, right? And we all have been called to help needs, to go meet those needs. We are needed by them. So let's be active in that. Some people might look at greeting people as antiquated, old, not something we do anymore. But keep in mind, this is something that's called to do by God. It's respectful, it's kind. Paul even tells us, 1 Corinthians 16:20, all brothers send you greetings. Greet one another with a holy kiss. Now, obviously, we're not kissing each other, especially not during COVID, but we're still called to greet one another. We're still called to go. And like I said, it's not just going and saying good morning and walking away. That's the start. And then from there, you open up to a meaningful conversation, which we're going to talk about next week, on how you can have a meaningful conversation with people and allow that to be available to them in case they want to share more. You can kind of grow in that relationship. Remember who you're talking to. It's not just some random person. It is a person who's an image bearer of God who could be struggling with a lot of things. We need to think about them, love on them, care for them, give them the benefit of the doubt if maybe they have a bad attitude or unkind, but looking to seek to encourage them and help bear those burdens that they're going through. And some people who come to church obviously could be lost, struggling, going through a lot of things, and they're coming to church because they're just looking for answers and they don't know what to do. We need to be mindful to look for those people. You say, well, how do I know which one's lost? You don't. But as you greet new people you don't know, you might find somebody. And that's a good thing, and God has placed you there. Not to have all the answers, but to be there with them, to share and to grow in that relationship. And when God allows, to share God's truth with them as well. So we need to prioritize. Obviously, we can't greet everybody, but who should we prioritize on a Sunday morning? And the pastors have talked about this over a year ago, talking about, first of all, at the last 5 minutes and after service, what should we do? First, look for the guest, the person who's new. And I would say this also applies to events. If you're going to like the Easter extravaganza or the CCC or whatever events we may have in the future, look for people that you don't know and go and greet them. Secondly, look for what we would call the marginalized. Those are kind of sitting alone. Maybe they're not very talkative. Maybe they look like they're not very approachable. But God is calling us to go and to share with them, to talk with them, to love on them. And the book says this, and I agree with it. Obviously, one of the other marginalized people would be children. A lot of times when we're adults, we look over the kids and talk to the adults. Let's also understand those children are image bearers of God as well. And those children need to be loved, and they are desiring to be greeted and to share. And I know some people do that amazingly well. I know Pastor Andrew, constantly, when he's around kids, he will look at them, he will talk to them, he will truly care about them. And you can see a child's eyes light up when he shares. And that is a blessing. But may we all be willing to do that. When we see children, not to say, don't get in trouble, stay away from me, or just look to the parents and talk to them and ignore it like the kid's not there. Let's be mindful to be willing to talk to the children as well, to love on them, because they too are carrying heavy burdens, whether we realize it or not, that are making them struggle at home. Maybe it's causing them to act out. There's lots of things going on, even in a child's life, and they need our support. So, just to kind of wrap up the thought, Welch, the author of the book, reminds us that we can't just do this by sheer willpower. We can't just say, I'm going to try harder next week. We need the power of God. We need God helping us every step of the way. Otherwise, we'll do it for a couple weeks, and then we'll go back to our old routines. We need to be intentional. We need to be proactive in doing it. People are in need, and God is allowing us to be needed by them. So remember, just as God pursues us, may we pursue others. And step one, be willing to go and greet them. All right, church, we're about ready to start our prayer time. But I want to remind you, tonight is a special night, a night that we get to honor those who have served our country and continue to serve our country. We are thankful for them. If you are a veteran, we are very appreciative of the service that you have committed, the time you have been willing to spend, the sacrifice you've been willing to make, both here in the United States and abroad. So we thank you for your service. And during this time of prayer, we're going to be praying for you, for your family. We'll also be praying for others who are actively putting their lives, sacrificing their lives for our nation. Both of you talk about police officers or firemen. And so we just thank you, though, for your service. We love you greatly. All right, so let's start in a word of prayer. If you're here in the audience, feel free to come up between any of us, and you can join in and pray and lead in praying as well. All right, so let's have a word of prayer.